Hey guys, this is Infinite Flash here. Today I'm going to be talking about a game that happened in round 2 of the Sinquefield Cup between Hikaru Nakamura and Magnus Carlsen. There's not much of an introduction that you need for these guys. These guys are just bulldogs at the top of the world. Nakamura has never won a classical time control game, which is like really long time control game. I mean, against Magnus, and I guess he's kind of just desperate against Magnus to get something. Uh, he's been winning in like the past 3 games versus him, and he just can't win. He just loses them all, and I think it's definitely a psychological thing for Nakamura to overcome. So he usually has played in D4 and gotten the Nimzo Indian position against Carlsen in his last few matches, I think. And Nakamura has gone to F3 with a really sharp position and has succeeded against Carlsen in getting a good position in the opening, but somehow always manages to spoil it. I think it's definitely a psychological advantage. Is Nakamura rarely just spoils such things against every time against some opponent. In this game, he chose something much more solid. He chose to play e4, and Carlsen always plays e5. That's why they say it's solid. So, and we quickly get a Rui Lopez, and this is the most popular opening in the e4 e5 complexes, and usually Black's main two options are knight f6 and a6, but in this game Black chose a more, let's say, solid setup with g6, planning bishop g7 and knight e7. Um, this is pretty solid for Black here, and nothing terrible is going to happen out of the opening because of this. And both sides just continue with their normal development in this kind of position. c3 is a little bit unusual, but it kind of makes sense because you want to push d4 in this position and possibly have this retreat square for your bishop here to help support your center let's say in the later part of the game. After a6, taking the bishop, White played bishop a4, and in this position, knight g7 is certainly possible, but Black chose d6, prepared to meet d4, which is happening in the game with bishop d7, and in this kind of structure, White can play d5, and that's what he played, kind of trading off the light squared bishops here. And this is probably leading to a slight advantage for White in this kind of position. One other option he can consider is placing the bishop here on b3 or bishop on c2, trying to keep the light squared bishops on. And even though from a structural point of view, this is the bad bishop on, the White's light squared bishop is the bad bishop, this light squared bishop actually, let's say, helps control some of the light squares, and could become a useful piece later that you might want to consider keeping. The only issue I have with White getting, let's say, a slight advantage in this kind of position after knight e7, which is forced after d5, bishop takes d7, getting rid of this so-called bad bishop according to this pawn structure, queen takes d7 recapturing, and now c4 solidifying the center in this kind of King's Indian like formation that you can expect with f5, and White having all these three center pawns here. You can expect White to be very comfortable in this kind of position, but it's hard to say what to do in this kind of position. Nakamura kind of continued with his traditional King's Indian kind of play with knight c3, but Black played first h6 because a move like f5 first just happens to not be that great because f5 runs into knight g5 and knight e6 comes in. That's atrocious for Black here. So he played h6, preparing f5, and White continued developing, and Black played f5 as you might expect, to put some pressure in the center and support this king side space that he has over here. This is quite okay for Black actually, and there's no way to develop this bishop properly as bishop e3 doesn't really have a, let's say, significant plan just yet, and Black will probably consider playing let's say after bishop e3, knight f6 here, and you can't really defend the pawn knight f6, and I mean maybe the structure is a little bit interesting to play. Maybe this is White's. Maybe this could be a better option for White in retrospect, with perhaps b4. But I mean, what he played in the game for White played in the game doesn't look so bad either. After f5, he played knight d2, supporting this pawn. So pawn takes pawn, knight d takes e5 is quite nice for white. So black usually wants to keep the tension in the center with knight f6, and with these knights here, kind of supporting these light squared pawns over here, and the dark squared bishop, kind of controlling over the d4 square, and in some for the meantime, it's quite nice. I think for quite okay for black. I mean, not nice. And now white wants to support his center. That was one other idea of knight d2, that he could push the f pawn and support this pawn with the pawn. And if pawn takes pawn, you always have to keep this option of f takes e3, and you're always kind of putting your pawns on the light squares according to your bishop, which is kind of a good bishop here in this kind of position. And I think white has a very very slight advantage. I'm not really sure how to exploit it though. What you'll see what happens in the game. So in the game, black just castled here, and Nakamura wanted to develop this bishop properly, so he continued with the b4 pawn push over here, allowing bishop b2 in the future. The only problem I have with this move is that black has a really fast counterattack in this kind of position. Black can play c6 here, and normally white would play a move such as knight b3, kind of advancing c5 possibly in the future, and then allowing this bishop to come to this square. The only problem with knight b3 is that it concretely is just not a good move. A move black can kind of exploit with c takes d5 here first. And after the normal recapture c takes d5, black has the strong move queen c7, attacking the knight here, gaining control of the c4 square, leaving this check open to pick up the b4 pawn. This is clearly not a good position for white. That's not a position that white wants to play. My board is having a glitch problem again, probably because of the lag issue. I'm sorry for that, guys. After c6, white really didn't want to leave the c file open for the pieces and his knight to be exposed here, and so he just decided to just take here. And in this position, Carlsen certainly could have taken it with the pawn here, and that structure is certainly interesting, but I don't think he liked the pressure on the d6 pawn to be. It's kind of annoying to deal with the backwards d pawn for a long time like that. So he just took with the knight here, and even though this is a backwards d pawn, it won't be for so long since the knight, will be coming here, and this pawn here won't be so exposed here. And one other idea is that the pawn is hanging here on b4, and white doesn't really want to push here because this weakens the c5 square at a tremendous cost. And I think after knight d4, this kind of structure is very fine with rook c8, and you're kind of attacking this pawn, and it's really hard to advance this ever, and it's always stuck here. So that's why white doesn't usually want to play b5. Also, black has the option of opening the file for his rook, trying to activate that way. Maybe that's probably why white doesn't want to push there. And in this position, not b5. White continued with a3, defending this pawn. The only problem I have is that black plays knight d4, and even though white continues developing his bishop, which was the other point of bishop e2, trying to get this bishop to, connect, trying to get this bishop out so you can kind of connect your rooks over here in this kind of way. But black kind of attains really active counterplay along this file, and I really don't think white has that much. I mean, since it's just one bad piece that black has, all of black's other pieces are very much working in harmony, and you can kind of see the position opening up. And even though white has a quote-unquote good bishop here, it doesn't really attack much in this kind of position, so he tries to make use of it by playing knight e2. The problem with moving the knight to, say, a square such as knight d5 is that it concretely just does not work. Black has the strong move knight takes d5, allowing white to get kind of this closed center, right? At first, this looks kind of bad for black since he has the bad bishop versus white's good bishop, but tactics always matter in position. So black has knight c2 attacking this rook, and if the rook kind of moves here to, let's say, counterattack, knight e3, forking the queen and the rook here, is winning an exchange here for black. And white can also take here, but on a structural point of view, you're kind of helping this bishop out, and this pawn these two pawns are very comfortable. On a tactical point of view, black has the very nice structural move b5, undermining the c4 pawn, and this pawn will have to, let's say, disappear soon, and the d5 pawn will be weak on this square. Black is very, very happy with that. So knight d5 is the natural move, but it's just not working. Instead, white just played knight e2, and if white could somehow force black to take here, say takes, then the structure is quite okay for white since he'll be able to coordinate his pieces here on the d file, and then this will be a bad bishop. But Carlsen has played a really, really nice move here, in my opinion, with activating his knight here, allowing it to go to f4 with the move knight h5 here. And in the game, we see, even though he allowed knight takes d4, pawn takes here, and a double pawn here, this isn't so bad for black because he's getting active counterplay. Let's say if the knight ever moves, you're getting active counterplay with the weak pawn here and kind of activating your bishop here with bishop e5 and kind of opening lines really in general. Knight f4 to apply pressure. And in this position, it's really hard to recommend anything for white. A move that you normally want to play is like queen b1 and queen d3 to blockade the square, but that's always has knight f4 behind it. A move such as g3 seems pretty natural, but it kind of just runs into d3, opening up the position, and a move such as bishop takes g7, trading off this bishop right over here, that strong bishop. Ironically speaking, kind of unexpected that the g7 bishop would be so strong. Queen takes g7 can be played, and it's very, very annoying to deal with this open diagonal with queen d4 check, and a move such as knight b3 is met by f takes, and this kind of capture. And at the end of this line, black has the annoying move queen c3, just attacking everything, and this kind of position's very, very uncomfortable for white to do. Even though black has weak pawns, let's say here on d3 and d6, what's more important is the piece activity that he gets from the open diagonal with the queen infiltrating in white's position. I want to emphasize that, guys. A lot of the times, piece activity is more important than pawn structure, and this is what all the top level players do extremely well. They know how to judge which one's more important often, which one is more of a dynamic factor, and which one's more of a static feature. And instead of playing like a move like g3, it's really hard to recommend anything else. Moves like queen e2 always kind of run into knight f4, but also they run into d3 along kind of this discovered check and a double attack against the queen and the bishop along this diagonal. In the game, Nakamura just decided to take the pawn here and kind of just resolve the tension in the center, kind of leave this pawn here and kind of decide later what he wants to do. And here, Carlsen played a really good move in my opinion, and I really like this move that he played. Knight f4, activating the knight, allowing this pawn to be taken for, let's say, a pawn sacrifice, but it's a pawn sacrifice you really don't want to take if you're white. Nakamura ended up playing f6 here, but if you take here, I think rook f6, taking on g6 is giving white a really, really comfortable game. Moves like bishop d4 actually lose on the spot because rook g6 attacking on a g2 followed by queen h3, and this bishop is simultaneously hanging with that. So white would lose actually here. Instead of bishop takes d4, it's very difficult to recommend anything. A move like g3 is met by rook takes g6 and queen h3. You can already see knight kind of d3 running already in the mix, and if the queen somehow has to move, then there's always this knight e2 check to try to mix it up, and the overall structure does not look that great for white. I think perhaps let's say white probably has to bring his knight to the center and try to open up this queen, right? But I guess after rook takes c4, defending the pawn, and maybe white should play king h1 to get out of this pin. Black has pretty active pieces here. This is definitely better than, let's say, if you looked back when he traded the light squared bishops, right? Look at the space disadvantage, but he's kind of activated his pieces now, and his position looks kind of awesome, really. Even at the cost of a pawn, I think Black's doing quite well. Although it's not so clear how to proceed. White has ideas of queen d3, kind of taking advantage of these light squares, but Black has no trouble activating his pieces, and he should be fine here. So in the game, he didn't really want this rook to come to g6 and put pressure on the king side and generate some kind of an attack over here. Nakamura just closed down the king side with f6, allowing bishop takes f6 and played g3 and forced the knight to, let's say, a square it doesn't really want to go to. And after g3, there's an important tactic that you have to look out here. Nakamura ended up playing for knight h3, but he knew fully well. Carlsen played knight h3. He knew fully well that the natural knight d3 attacking the bishop is actually leading to a pretty okay game for white immediately after knight e4. And the idea is that if knight takes b2, you're taking this bishop with check, and rook takes f6 is met by queen 64, double attacking across this diagonal, and black will lose the piece, and white will be okay in this kind of position. And so black didn't really want to allow this. He didn't really want to get rid of, trade off this kind of awesome knight for, let's say, this crappy bishop. So he ended up playing this check. But after this, white just moved up this king, and black didn't really see anything better than to move his knight back. I suppose that there are alternatives, but they're really not that great in this kind of position. And at least with knight g5, you always have this threat with queen h3 and kind of generate something with bishop e5 along the f file with along these squares too. And well, the game continuation is kind of a good indicator of what the position really is. White played the strong move queen b1, attacking the g6 pawn, putting pressure on here. And White can play queen h3, but there's not really much of a threat there at the moment. So he just defended the pawn here on g6, and he kind of gets his king out of danger in the back rank. There's always random checks sometimes later on in the game. A move like king h7, king h8. These kind of moves are always kind of helpful in improving your position. And White continued with the blockade of the pawn here. Often, if Black might consider pushing the d pawn here, activating his bishop. So White kind of canceled, let's say, ended that plan of pushing the d pawn. So this is pretty balanced, I would say. Black has some activity with the open files, and even though he's a bad pawn here, I think after the strong move bishop e5, he's activated pretty well here. And one idea is that bishop takes d4 is met by queen h3 and bishop takes g3 with a, probably a draw there by perpetual check. And in the game, we kind of got this kind of perpetual check after rook a1. A move like f4 is forking both pieces, but I think after queen h3, king h1, not going to g1, kind of getting on the same color as this bishop. That's a kind of a general rule you don't want to do, moving to g1 in any kind of position when you have this kind of bishop, let's say on this kind of diagonal and in some random position. You don't really want to go to g1. It doesn't really help you at all to go there. The general rule is you want to go to king h1, and let's say after the very, very strong bishop takes f4, I think White's doing okay, as he can play rook ae1, and after bishop e3 he can probably just take the pawn here, and the position is simplifying towards let's say or you can just take here. I mean, it doesn't really matter, but towards, let's say, equality. I think this position is pretty okay for both sides, and I mean, there's always these threats on each other's king. So a move like a retreating queen d7. I mean, White has a structural point of view, but Black is not lacking in activity along the f file here, and has a really, really nice knight to take advantage of these light squares. Black should be doing okay here. But instead of f4, what happened was that Nakamura just ended up playing rook e1, and Black did not see anything better than to play queen h3 check. Or I'm sorry, not queen h3. He didn't see anything better than to say bishop takes h3, bishop takes g3, excuse me, and take by h pawn. I mean, king takes g3. I think queen h3, king f2, and queen h2 is actually checkmate. It's kind of embarrassing. So I mean, h takes g3 is practically forced, and we had this draw by perpetual check via these squares. So overall, a pretty well played game. It's very difficult to tell where what White just kind of spoiled his advantage. Maybe I don't know. Maybe you should keep the light squared bishops on. It's very difficult to tell. perhaps d5 is the wrong move. That could be also it. Maybe you're supposed to keep kind of this, not push d5 and kind of close the center where black can slowly maneuver and squeak his way out. In retrospect, it's easy to say that, but during the game, when you have this bad bishop and you have this good bishop here, it's kind of tempting to play that. And I don't really see where Nakamura went wrong. He played in all the right moves, but somehow it just didn't work out. And I liked all his moves that he played, but it's hard to say where he spoiled it. Anyways, guys, a pretty interesting game where Carlsen diffused White's positional advantage, and overall, I think it was a well played game by both sides. Anyways, guys, I'm gonna be signing out right now. If you have any questions or anything of this kind of related to any problems you might have with the video, just leave a comment below. This is Infinite Flash signing out.